Thank you for being here. Please comment the letter Y to let me know you are ready, and listen to me tell the whole story. The expensive Pinot Noir instantly turned to vinegar in my mouth. I will never, for as long as I live, forget the exact sound of that massive dining room going completely, horrifyingly dead. It was a Friday night, and the formal dining room of the Vance estate in Newport was an absolute masterclass in intimidating, generational wealth. We were sitting at a custom, hand-carved mahogany table that easily cost more than the average American family's home. Above our heads hung a massive crystal chandelier that caught the light and looked like 1,000 crying diamonds. There were 20 highly distinguished guests in attendance that evening. We had a prominent state senator seated to my left, an oil tycoon to my right, and a collection of old money heirs and heiresses scattered around the fine porcelain plates. And then, sitting at the very head of the table, there was Charles Vance. Charles was the patriarch, the billionaire CEO of Vance Energy, and the father of my girlfriend, Chloe. He sat at the head of that long table like an ancient king surveying his loyal, unquestioning subjects. Throughout the entire evening, I had played my part perfectly. I wore a neatly tailored suit. I used the correct fork for the roasted sea bass, and I smiled politely at the condescending, passive-aggressive questions about my little startup ventures. But Charles had been drinking heavily since 6 o'clock. His face flushed red with a mixture of expensive scotch and an underlying, simmering anger that he carried with him everywhere. The dinner conversation had briefly turned to a recent charity event aimed at helping underprivileged youth in the city. I made a mild, polite comment about the absolute importance of giving kids a fighting chance, a topic that was deeply close to my heart given my own background. That simple sentence was the spark that hit the powder keg. Charles slammed his heavy crystal glass down onto the table. The sharp, violent clink echoed through the room like a gunshot. He stared directly at me, his eyes cold, blue, and completely devoid of human warmth. "Let us be entirely realistic here for a moment," Charles announced. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, cultured but cruel, specifically designed to travel across the long mahogany table and hit me squarely in the chest. "We do not bring strays into the house. We might feed them on the back porch, perhaps, if we are feeling particularly generous. But we certainly do not offer them a seat at our table." The air in the room simply vanished. 20 distinguished guests froze instantly in their seats. Forks hovered halfway to open mouths. Every single pair of eyes darted nervously between the billionaire patriarch and me. Charles leaned forward, a terrifying, thin smile forming on his lips. "It confuses the lineage. You see, a boy can have his little flings. A girl can have her rebellion. But you do not bring street garbage to a gala dinner. You do not pretend that a man who grew up in the foster system, a man without a real family or a proper name, belongs in a room where the cutlery costs more than his entire net worth." I felt the blood drain completely from my face, pooling heavily in my hands, making them tremble slightly beneath the thick linen tablecloth. I clenched my fists under the table until my fingernails bit deeply into my skin, using the sharp physical pain to ground myself in reality. I looked over at Chloe, the woman I loved. She was pale, staring intently down at her plate, absolutely refusing to meet my eyes. She said nothing, not a single word to defend me. "Look at him," Charles sneered, gesturing toward me with his silver fork as if I were a specimen in a jar. "He knows he is a fraud. He knows he does not belong here. It is actually unkind to him to let him pretend. My name is Julian. I am 34 years old. I am not a stray. I am the founder and majority shareholder of Nexus Dynamics, one of the most aggressive and successful green technology firms in Silicon Valley. But tonight, in this Newport mansion, I was just the nameless, faceless boyfriend being publicly executed for the crime of being born poor." I did not yell. I did not throw my drink in his face. I carefully unhooked my napkin from my lap. I placed it on the table, smoothing out the white linen with deliberate, agonizing precision. The silence was so heavy it felt like physical pressure pushing against my eardrums. I stood up slowly, adjusting my suit jacket. I looked Charles directly in the eyes. I refused to let him see even a single ounce of fear. "Thank you for the meal, Charles," I said, my voice perfectly steady, betraying absolutely none of the hurricane raging inside my rib cage. "And thank you for the clarity. It is truly rare to meet a man so eager to show the entire world exactly how small he really is." The collective gasp that went around the table sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. Charles blinked, his arrogant smirk faltering for a microsecond before hardening into pure, unadulterated rage. I did not wait for his reply. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I did not run. I walked with the slow, deliberate cadence of a man who had walked through fire before and knew damn well he would not burn. The cold, salty Atlantic breeze hit my face the exact moment I stepped out of the heavy oak doors of the mansion, bringing a harsh but deeply welcome relief to my burning skin. The sprawling gravel driveway was a showcase of European automotive engineering, a sea of wealth reflecting the moonlight. I walked with heavy steps toward my modest, reliable sedan, which was parked conspicuously between a sleek black Ferrari and a silver Porsche 911. I kept that simple car for a reason. It was my anchor. It was a daily reminder of exactly where I came from and how hard I had worked to get here. I pulled my keys from my pocket and was just reaching for my door handle when I heard the frantic, desperate crunch of high heels running on gravel behind me. "Julian, wait. Please wait." It was Chloe. She was running toward me in the dim light, her expensive, custom-fitted silk dress catching the ocean wind, making her look breathless and panicked. I stopped, resting my hand on the cold metal roof of my car, and slowly turned to face her. "Julian, please," she panted, finally reaching me and throwing her hand out to grab my arm. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and embarrassment. "I am so incredibly sorry. I did not know. I swear to you on my life. I had absolutely no idea he was going to be that vicious tonight." I looked down at her delicate hand resting on my jacket sleeve, and then I looked up at her face. I had loved this woman deeply. I had spent the last 2 years of my life trying to bridge the massive, invisible gap between our two entirely different worlds. I had tried so hard to show her that character, integrity, and how you treat the waiter mattered so much more than trust funds and zip codes. But looking at her right now, shivering slightly in the cool night air, all I saw was weakness. "He called me street garbage, Chloe," I said. My voice was low, devoid of shouting, but dangerously calm. "He humiliated me in front of 20 of the most powerful people in this state. He stripped me down to nothing, and you just sat there. You looked at your expensive plate of food. He is drunk, Julian," she pleaded, thick tears welling up in her eyes and spilling over her cheeks. "He is under a massive amount of stress right now. You know Vance Energy is struggling. The new corporate merger is taking a horrible toll on him. Just, please nan mot chut. Be the bigger person. I will talk to him tomorrow when he is sober. I will make him apologize to you. Just come back inside with me, please. Do not make a scene and ruin the night." A bitter, dry laugh forcefully escaped my lips. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Do not make a scene? Your father just tried to publicly strip me of my human dignity. He called me a stray dog, and you are worried about making a scene at a dinner party." I pulled my arm gently but firmly away from her grip. "You cannot fix a rot that deep, Chloe. You just can't. He did not just insult me tonight. He showed me exactly what he thinks of me. But more importantly, in that silence at the table, you showed me exactly who you are." "What is that supposed to mean?" she cried out, taking a stunned step backward as if I had physically pushed her. "It means you think he is right," I said softly, the devastating realization settling heavily and permanently in my chest. "Deep down in your core, you agree with him. You think you are slumming it by dating me. You think I should be endlessly grateful to endure his abuse just for the sheer privilege of standing next to you in photos. That is not true. I love you," she sobbed, her voice echoing slightly in the empty driveway. "If you truly respected me, Chloe, if you truly loved me as an equal, you would have flipped that dining table the second he opened his mouth. You would have walked out with me? I replied, opening my car door and getting inside. I am going home. Do not follow me. Julian, please don't do this. Do not let him win. Do not let him break us apart. She yelled over the sound of my engine starting. I rolled down the window and looked past her, staring at the massive stone fortress of a mansion looming in the dark background. It was a monument to ego, inherited wealth, and cruelty. He cannot break what he does not own, I said, looking her in the eyes one last time. Go back inside, Chloe. Your father expects you to finish your dessert. I rolled the window up, put the car in drive, and pulled away. The tires kicked up a spray of white gravel. I watched Chloe shrink in my rearview mirror until she was completely swallowed by the shadows of the massive estate, leaving me alone with the road ahead. Driving alone down the winding curves of the Pacific Coast Highway, the absolute pitch-black darkness of the ocean perfectly mirrored my mood. The adrenaline crash from the confrontation finally hit my system like a physical blow. My hands were gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned completely white, and my jaw ached from clenching my teeth. The rhythmic sound of the tires on the asphalt acted like a metronome, dragging my mind backward, forcing me to replay the painful highlight reel of my life that Charles Vance found so incredibly disgusting. I remembered the distinct, suffocating smell of industrial bleach and boiled cabbage in the state-run group homes. I remembered the heavy, crushing feeling in the pit of my stomach as a 7-year-old boy, sitting on a worn-out mattress, finally realizing that nobody was coming to save me. I had to save myself. I remembered working grueling double shifts waiting tables at a greasy diner, dealing with rude, entitled customers who snapped their fingers at me, just so I could scrape together enough cash to afford my community college textbooks. Every dollar I had ever made was soaked in my own sweat. The Vance family had never explicitly asked me about my financial portfolio. They saw my practical, off-the-rack suits. They heard through the grapevine that I didn't have parents or a family home to visit on Thanksgiving, and they immediately made their ironclad assumptions. I vividly remembered the very first time I met Victoria, Chloe's mother. We were at a country club luncheon. She had looked me up and down with eyes that looked like shattered pieces of ice. Her fake, polite smile never quite reached her cheeks. During our brief conversation, she had casually, strategically mentioned a wealthy friend's recent, messy divorce. She specifically leaned in and highlighted how money always ruins relationships when one party brings absolutely nothing to the table. Don't you agree, Julian? It wasn't a question. It was a calculated, venomous warning shot fired directly across my bow. Then there was Wyatt, Chloe's older brother. Wyatt was the supposed golden child, the chosen heir to the Vance corporate empire. Wyatt was a walking, breathing testament to the dangers of unearned confidence and a massive inheritance. He had never worked a hard day in his life. I remembered a specific incident at a charity mixer a year ago. Wyatt, drunk and stumbling, had carelessly spilled a full glass of red wine all over my only decent suit jacket. Instead of apologizing, he just laughed a booming, obnoxious laugh, pulled out his money clip and said, "Do not worry about it, Julian. Here, I will write you a check for $50. You can go to the discount store and buy 3 more of those cheap rags." I had swallowed my pride that night. I had swallowed my pride every single time they threw a subtle insult my way. Not because I was weak, not because I was intimidated by their money, but because I was playing a much, much larger game. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that I had built Nexus Dynamics from absolutely nothing, starting with a single laptop in a freezing, unheated garage. When the company's green energy tech exploded on the market, when my patents started bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars in licensing fees alone, I made a very conscious, deliberate choice to stay completely out of the public spotlight. I used complex holding companies, non-disclosure agreements, and a highly paid proxy CEO to handle all public negotiations and media appearances. I wanted privacy. I wanted a normal life. I wanted my revolutionary work to speak for itself, rather than becoming a celebrity billionaire. I had never lied to Chloe. I told her I ran a tech company in the city. She just naturally assumed, based on my humble lifestyle, that it was a small, struggling IT support firm and never bothered to ask for the financial details. Her family never bothered to look past the surface either. They were utterly blinded by their own deep-seated prejudice. They firmly believed that true wealth and power only came from a long, unbroken lineage of aristocratic blood, not from the brilliant mind of an orphan. I hit the gas pedal harder, the engine of my car roaring defiantly into the empty night. Charles Vance thought he had put me in my place tonight. He thought he had effortlessly crushed a meaningless bug on his windshield. He had absolutely no idea that he had just declared all-out war on the one single man holding the keys to his company's survival. I finally arrived at my private penthouse in the heart of downtown just before 10 p.m. I bypassed the main lobby and took the private elevator straight up. The moment the doors opened, I walked straight across the hardwood floors to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the glittering, endless skyline of the city I had conquered. The hot anger from the dinner party was completely gone now. In its place was a cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear focus. My secure cell phone vibrated loudly on the marble kitchen island, breaking the silence of the massive apartment. I picked it up. The caller ID read Sarah. Sarah was my executive assistant, my chief of staff, and without a doubt, the sharpest, most ruthless operational mind I had ever encountered in the business world. "Julian," Sarah said. Her voice was tight, clipped, and strictly professional the exact moment I answered the call. "I know it is late on a Friday night, and I know you were attending the Vance family dinner, but we have a major, time-sensitive development. The corporate lawyer for Vance Energy just sent over a highly aggressive, demanding email to our legal team." "Go on," I said, not taking my eyes off the city lights below. "They are demanding we move the official signing of the corporate merger up to Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp," Sarah explained rapidly. "Julian, they are bleeding cash at an unprecedented rate. Their stock is teetering right on the edge of a total collapse. If they don't get the Nexus acquisition capital injected into their accounts immediately, they are going to miss their massive debt obligations to the banks by Tuesday. They are desperate." I stood perfectly still, looking at my faint reflection in the dark, cold glass. Vance Energy was a dying dinosaur. They were an old, bloated fossil fuel company that had failed to innovate for 2 decades. Now, they were desperately trying to pivot into the green tech sector to save themselves from total bankruptcy. They needed Nexus Dynamics to survive. They needed my patented technology. They needed my massive cash reserves. Charles Vance knew Nexus was the ultimate target. He knew our financials inside and out. For the past 6 months, he had been begging and pleading with my proxy CEO to finalize this deal. What Charles Vance did not know, what he could never have fathomed in his arrogant mind, was that the street garbage he had just humiliated in front of his billionaire friends was the majority shareholder and the ultimate, unquestionable decision-maker of the very company he was praying to for salvation. "Sarah," I said, my voice dropping an octave, steady as stone. "Yes, Julian. What is the play? Kill it. Kill the entire deal." There was a brief, stunned pause on the encrypted line. Even Sarah, who was used to my aggressive business tactics, was caught off guard. "I am sorry. The connection must have broken up for a second. Julian, did you just say kill the merger? The deal is currently valued at $4 billion. The contractual termination fee alone is going to cost us." "I do not care about the termination fee," I interrupted, my tone slicing through the air, leaving absolutely no room for debate or hesitation. "Write the penalty check straight out of the operational fund tonight. Terminate the letter of intent. Pull our financing commitments immediately. Notify the SEC that Nexus Dynamics is withdrawing from all negotiations effective as of this exact minute." "Julian, you need to understand the fallout here," Sarah warned, her fingers already flying across her keyboard in the background. "This will absolutely destroy them. If we pull our backing out right now without warning, the open market will slaughter their stock on Monday morning. They have no backup plan. They have no other financial lifeline." "That is exactly the point, Sarah. I want you to draft the official termination notice right now." "Understood," she said, shifting instantly into execution mode. "What reason should our legal team cite for the sudden withdrawal?" "Do not let the legal team send it," I instructed coldly. I want you to bypass their corporate lawyers entirely. Send the termination notice directly to Charles Vance's personal, private email address. Cite incompatible corporate values and highly toxic leadership as the sole reasons for our withdrawal. Make it completely, abundantly clear that Nexus Dynamics refuses to do business with bigots who look down on the working class. The termination notice will be in his private inbox in exactly 5 minutes, Sarah confirmed, the sound of her typing echoing loudly over the speaker. Thank you, Sarah. Have a good weekend and get some rest. Monday morning is going to be an absolute bloodbath on Wall Street. I hung up the phone and tossed it casually onto the plush leather sofa. I walked over to the corner bar, poured myself a simple glass of ice water, and drank it down, feeling the coldness hit my stomach. The heavy iron guillotine had been released. Now all I had to do was sit back and wait for the blade to fall. I woke up surprisingly early on Saturday morning, feeling more rested and clear-headed than I had in months. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the news, and made a pot of cheap, bitter drip coffee. A stubborn, grounding habit left over from my completely broke college days that I never quite shook, despite having a private chef on call. I stepped out onto the expansive terrace. The city was just waking up below me, completely unaware of the massive corporate earthquake that was about to hit the financial district on Monday. By 8 a.m., my personal cell phone started buzzing relentlessly on the table. I casually glanced at the screen. I had 7 missed calls and a dozen frantic text messages from Chloe. I ignored all of them. The official termination email had landed securely in Charles's inbox late last night, but the news had not been leaked to the public wire or the press yet. Right now, only the absolute highest levels of Vance Energy Management knew that they were suddenly standing on the edge of a terrifying cliff without a parachute. At precisely 8:30 a.m., my secure intercom buzzed. It was the head of security for my residential building. "Mr. Thorne," the guard said, sounding slightly flustered. "I sincerely apologize for the early interruption on a weekend, sir, but there is a woman down here in the main lobby demanding to see you immediately. A Mrs. Victoria Vance. She is being highly insistent and threatens to cause a scene if we don't let her up." I smiled to myself, taking a slow sip of my hot coffee. "It's fine, Marcus. Send her up." Exactly 5 minutes later, the private elevator doors slid silently open directly into my foyer. Victoria Vance stepped out. She was dressed impeccably in a tailored, cream-colored designer suit, clutching a rare Birkin bag that cost significantly more than my first 3 cars combined. Her posture was incredibly rigid, her chin held high, and her face was set in a tight, carefully practiced mask of polite disdain. She looked exactly like a woman who had spent her entire privileged life trying to control the uncontrollable with money. She walked briskly into my living room, her expensive heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. She looked around at the minimalist, modern decor with a barely concealed sneer of judgment. She obviously didn't know I owned the entire top-floor penthouse. She probably assumed I was renting a small, overpriced studio apartment. "Good morning, Victoria," I said casually, leaning comfortably against the marble kitchen counter, holding my coffee mug. "To what exactly do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Did Charles send you here to finish the speech he started last night?" She stopped a few feet away from me, clutching her expensive bag with white-knuckled hands. "Charles does not know I am here. And frankly, Julian, I do not have the time or the patience for your sarcastic attitude today. Our family is dealing with a catastrophic, highly sensitive business crisis this morning, and my husband is currently losing his mind." "Is that so?" I asked, feigning complete, innocent surprise. "I am sorry to hear that." "Yes, you are," she snapped. "And the absolute last thing this family needs right now is Chloe throwing a massive, emotional tantrum over a dramatic breakup with a man beneath her station." Victoria reached quickly into her designer bag and pulled out a crisp, heavy white envelope. She tossed it disrespectfully onto the marble counter between us. It landed with a soft, incredibly insulting slap. "There is a certified cashier's check inside that envelope for exactly $100,000, she said. her tone dripping with absolute, poisonous condescension. I want you to take it. I want you to pack your cheap things, leave the state and block Chloe's phone number. Disappear from our lives permanently. I looked down at the white envelope, and then slowly looked back up at her perfectly manicured face. Let me get this straight. You came to my home, at 8 in the morning, to bribe me to leave your daughter. Oh, let us drop the tiresome act, Julian, she sighed heavily, waving her hand dismissively in the air. We both know exactly how the world works. We both know you were only dating her for the financial access and the lifestyle. People of your lower class always are. I stayed through 30 years of a miserable, loveless marriage just to protect my share of the inheritance and build this family's legacy. I refuse to let a nobody from the streets drag my daughter into the mud. Take the money, Julian. It is a generous salary. It is more cash than you will ever earn in a decade of serving tables or whatever pathetic job it is you do. I reached out and picked up the envelope. I did not bother to open it. I held it lightly between my fingers, feeling the heavy, expensive texture of the bank paper. $100,000. I mused aloud, tilting my head. Completely tax-free, she added smugly, a victorious smile finally touching her lips. A fresh start. I looked her dead in the eyes, my expression completely, chillingly blank. Then, slowly and deliberately, without breaking eye contact, I tore the envelope and the cashier's check inside cleanly in half. Then I stacked the pieces and tore them into quarters. I opened my hand and let the shredded, useless pieces of paper fall like snow into the trash can next to the counter. Victoria's jaw literally dropped open. The aristocratic mask of polite disdain completely shattered, revealing pure, unadulterated shock. Are you clinically insane? Do you have any idea what you just did? I think you should leave my home now, Victoria, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. And honestly, you really should have kept that money for yourself. Because come Monday morning, your family is going to need every single penny to survive. I didn't have to be in the room to know what happened next. I later found out exactly how the rest of that weekend played out at the Vance estate. My private security team and my highly placed industry contacts provided me with a very clear, detailed picture of the absolute chaos I had unleashed upon them. The exact moment Charles Vance opened his private email and read my blunt termination notice on Friday night, the quiet, luxurious estate turned into an active war zone. He didn't sleep. He spent the entire night and all of Saturday morning screaming at the top of his lungs at his lead corporate lawyer over the phone. He was pacing the floors of his mahogany office, demanding that they find a legal loophole, a breach of contract, a technicality, absolutely anything to force Nexus Dynamics back to the negotiating table. But my legal team was the most expensive and thorough in the country. Our contracts were bulletproof armor. We had wired the massive termination penalty fee flawlessly and immediately. Legally speaking, we were ghosts. We were gone. By late Saturday afternoon, the sheer, suffocating panic had deeply infected the rest of the family. Wyatt, the arrogant golden child, finally caught wind of the disaster and burst violently into Charles's home office. Wyatt didn't care about the thousands of employees who were about to lose their jobs. He didn't care about the proud legacy of his grandfather's company. Wyatt cared about exactly one thing, his massive inheritance. What the hell do you mean the Nexus deal is completely dead? Wyatt had screamed, his face pale with terror, his voice cracking. My entire trust fund is heavily tied up in that stock price. Dad, I have massive leverage and margin calls to cover with the bank. If the stock tanks when the market opens on Monday, the bank is going to call in my loans. I will be bankrupt. Charles, exhausted, hungover, and desperate, tried to silence his hysterical son. I am handling it, Wyatt. Keep your voice down. The Nexus Proxy CEO is just playing aggressive hardball to lower the valuation. I will get him on the phone. I will fly to his office. I will offer him a permanent board seat. I will offer him 20% of the voting rights. Whatever he wants, I will give it to him. They will not even take our calls. Their lawyers have blocked our numbers. Wyatt yelled back, throwing a crystal paperweight across the room. I am not going down with this ship. I am calling my private broker right now. I am instructing him to aggressively short the stock and sell off every single one of my personal shares on Monday morning at the opening bell, right before the public finds out we are ruined. If you dump millions of shares at the opening bell, you will trigger a massive, uncontrollable sell-off. Charles roared, his face turning purple as he realized his own flesh and blood was preparing to stab him in the back. You will trigger a panic. You will destroy this company completely just to save your own skin. Watch me. Wyatt spat back, storming out of the room. That was the harsh, ugly reality of the Vance lineage they were so incredibly proud of. Underneath the tailored suits, the charity galas, and the snobbish country club memberships, they were vicious. When the real pressure hit, when their enormous wealth was actually threatened, there was absolutely no family loyalty. There was no honor. There was only pure, unadulterated, primal selfishness. They were more than willing to cannibalize their own father to survive the winter. While they were viciously tearing each other apart in their massive Newport mansion, screaming over lawyers and trust funds, I spent my entire Sunday in total, undisturbed silence. I didn't open a bottle of champagne. I didn't celebrate or gloat to my friends. I sat alone in my dark home office, staring intently at the glowing blue light of 3 large monitors, preparing for the final lethal strike. The corporate business world is inherently ruthless, and I am no saint. I knew full well that pulling the merger would devastate Charles Vance financially, but it would also deeply hurt the thousands of innocent, hardworking people currently employed at Vance Energy. I needed to know exactly what kind of collateral damage I was causing. I needed to look at the numbers before I burned the entire structure to the ground. Late Sunday night, while the city outside my window slept, I logged securely into a highly encrypted, private server. Over the past 6 months of intense due diligence for the corporate merger, Nexus Dynamics had legally demanded and received total access to Vance Energy's deepest, most confidential financial records. Charles had desperately tried to hide the ugly, bleeding parts of his balance sheet in complex offshore accounts, but my team of forensic accountants were the most relentless bloodhounds in the world. I sat back in my ergonomic chair and spent hours manually combing through the raw data. And what I found hidden in the spreadsheets completely changed the game. It turned my personal, quiet vendetta into a righteous, fiery crusade. Charles Vance was not just a spectacularly incompetent businessman. He was a desperate criminal. According to the hidden ledgers, he had been actively covering up massive, catastrophic financial losses in his core fossil fuel divisions for over 5 years. To keep the company's stock price artificially inflated on Wall Street, and to aggressively maintain his own billionaire, jet-setting lifestyle, he had been illegally borrowing massive sums of money directly from the employee pension funds. He was systematically stealing the deferred salary of the working class. He was quietly raiding the secure retirement accounts of men and women who had spent 30 years breaking their backs on oil rigs and in refineries for him. He was effectively stealing the college fund of his employees' children to pay for his wife's Birkin bags and his son's Ferrari. If Vance Energy went totally bankrupt on Monday, which it absolutely mathematically would without my immediate cash injection, those thousands of innocent people would lose everything. Their lifelong pensions would simply evaporate into thin air, leaving them completely destitute in their twilight years. I leaned back heavily in my chair, the cold blue light of the monitors reflecting sharply in my eyes. The sheer hypocrisy of it made my blood boil. Charles had looked down his nose at me and called me street garbage. He despised the working class. He viewed his own loyal employees the exact same way he viewed me, as disposable, nameless tools designed only to serve his greatness and pad his wallet. At that exact moment, sitting in the dark, the mission drastically changed. This was no longer just about a rich, arrogant man insulting me at a fancy dinner party. This was about saving thousands of innocent livelihoods from a toxic tyrant who genuinely believed his wealthy bloodline made him completely above the law. I wasn't just going to break Charles Vance's pride anymore. I was going to surgically remove him from the company by force and take the wheel myself. I opened a new, blank document on my screen. I began drafting a highly aggressive, hostile takeover strategy. It was brutal, it was legally flawless, and it left Charles Vance with absolutely zero way out. I worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and a cold, driving sense of justice. By the time the sun started to rise over the city on Monday morning, the trap was fully set. I was ready. Monday morning arrived like a violent thunderstorm. At exactly 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, the opening bell of the stock market rang. The terrifying news that Nexus Dynamics had abruptly, without warning, pulled out of the Vance Energy acquisition hit the financial news wire like a nuclear bombshell. The market reaction was instantaneous, merciless, and incredibly violent. Vance Energy stock plummeted an astonishing 20% in the first 10 minutes of active trading. By 10 a.m., the massive panic sell-off, led by Wyatt Vance dumping his own shares, pushed the stock down 40%. Automated trading systems had to halt trading on the stock twice due to extreme, uncontrollable volatility. It was a complete financial bloodbath playing out live on national television. I was sitting calmly in my massive corner office at the Nexus Dynamics corporate headquarters, watching the red ticker run aggressively across the bottom of my wall-mounted television screen. My secure desk phone rang. It was Sarah. "Julian," she said, her voice carrying a rare, tight note of urgency. "I have a highly sensitive, unrecorded call holding on line 2. It is Elijah Thorne." I raised a single eyebrow. Elijah Thorne was the chief financial officer of Vance Energy. He was Charles's right-hand man, the guy who supposedly kept the books clean and managed the daily operations. "Put him through on the secure, encrypted line." There was a loud click, and then a heavy, utterly exhausted sigh echoed through the desk speaker. "Am I speaking directly to the CEO of Nexus Dynamics?" Elijah asked, his voice shaking slightly. "You are," I replied, keeping my voice intentionally disguised through a slight electronic filter we used for all external negotiations to protect my identity. "You have a lot of nerve calling me directly today, Elijah." "Please listen to me," Elijah said, sounding completely panicked. "I know Charles offended your team. I know he is incredibly arrogant and impossible to deal with. But if you pull out of this deal entirely today, this company dies by sunset. Thousands of good, hardworking people will lose their jobs and their homes. That sounds like a catastrophic failure of leadership on your end, Elijah." "Not mine," I replied coldly. "Listen to me," Elijah pleaded, dropping his voice to a frantic, hushed whisper, clearly terrified of being overheard. "I know about the massive pension fraud. I know Charles has been illegally siphoning the employee retirement accounts to cover the margin calls. I actively tried to stop him months ago, but he threatened to absolutely ruin my career. If this company goes under today, the SEC will investigate, and Charles is planning to frame me for the entire embezzlement scheme to save himself." I stayed completely silent, letting him sweat profusely on the other end of the line. He was a rat desperately abandoning a sinking ship, but right now he was an incredibly useful rat. "I have a secure, encrypted hard drive," Elijah finally confessed, his breathing heavy. "It contains every single deleted email, every hidden wire transfer, and every piece of hard proof you need to send Charles Vance to a federal prison for a decade. I will give it all to you. Just, please, buy the company, save the employees' pensions, and give me full legal immunity. I don't want a massive promotion. I just want to stay out of jail." A slow, cold smile crept onto my face. The absolute final piece of the puzzle had just dropped perfectly right into my lap. "Bring the drive directly to my office in exactly 1 hour, Elijah. If the data is solid, you have a deal." At exactly 10:45 a.m., the red security alert system heavily integrated into Sarah's desk flashed brightly. "Julian," she said swiftly over the office intercom, "we have a highly volatile situation down in the main lobby. Charles Vance is here in the building. He physically bypassed the lower security desk and is currently screaming at the front reception, demanding a face-to-face meeting with you immediately." I stood up slowly from my leather chair, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored shirt and straightening my tie. Let him up to the executive floor, Sarah. But under no circumstances do you bring him to my office. Understood. Where should I put him? Put him in conference room B. The glass one facing the east. The specific one where the morning sun glares directly into the room and makes it uncomfortably hot because the AC is currently being serviced? Sarah asked, a distinct hint of dark amusement in her professional voice. Exactly, I replied. Tell him the CEO is concluding a vital international call and will be with him shortly. Let him wait. I sat back down and watched the live security camera feed from my laptop screen. The heavy steel elevator doors opened on the executive floor, and Charles Vance stormed out like a raging bull. He looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, untouchable king who had insulted me on Friday night. His wildly expensive suit was deeply wrinkled. His silk tie was loosened and hanging crookedly, and his face was slick with a heavy sheen of terrified sweat. He looked exactly like a desperate man who was actively drowning. Sarah greeted him in the hallway with icy, flawless professionalism. She smoothly guided the frantic billionaire into the glass conference room and firmly shut the heavy, soundproof door behind him. For 30 excruciating, agonizing minutes, I let him sit there alone. I watched him closely on the high-definition camera feed. The intense, unyielding morning sun beamed directly through the massive glass windows, turning the room into a sweltering greenhouse. Charles paced back and forth across the carpet like a trapped, panicked animal. He checked his phone obsessively every few seconds, aggressively wiping his sweating forehead with a white silk handkerchief. Every 5 minutes, he would violently slam his fist down against the mahogany conference table in pure frustration. He was currently experiencing something he had probably never, ever felt in his entire privileged, sheltered life: total, devastating powerlessness. He was completely, utterly at the mercy of a faceless man he had never met, a man who held his entire family legacy firmly in the palm of his hand. I picked up the thick physical file folder containing the hostile takeover terms and the devastating financial data Elijah had just delivered. I took a deep, centering breath, letting the calm, absolute certainty of total victory settle over my shoulders. I walked out of my quiet office and headed slowly down the long, carpeted hallway toward conference room B. I reached out and grabbed the cold metal door handle. It was finally time to step inside and show Charles Vance exactly who the street garbage really was. I pushed the heavy metal door handle down, and the solid glass door of conference room B clicked open. The sound was incredibly quiet, but in that sweltering, sun-baked room, it might as well have been a gunshot. Charles Vance snapped his head toward the entrance. He was standing near the far window, his hands planted on his hips, his expensive suit jacket discarded on a nearby chair. Large patches of sweat stained his custom-tailored dress shirt. When he saw me standing in the doorway, his eyes widened in absolute shock, followed immediately by a surge of the familiar, arrogant rage I had seen at the dinner table on Friday night. He took a step forward, his face turning a deep, angry shade of purple. He actually thought I had followed him. He genuinely believed that a man from my background would be petty enough to stalk a billionaire to a corporate office just to settle a personal score. "What in the hell are you doing here?" Charles barked, his voice echoing loudly off the glass walls. "Did you follow me? Are you insane? Security. I am calling security right now. Get out of this room immediately. I do not have time for your pathetic teenage drama today. I am waiting for the CEO of this company, and when he gets here, I am going to make sure you are arrested for trespassing." I did not say a single word. I did not flinch. I calmly stepped fully into the room and let the heavy glass door click shut behind me. The soundproofing in the room was absolute. The chaotic noise of the corporate headquarters outside completely vanished, leaving only the sound of his heavy, panicked breathing. I walked slowly across the thick carpet. I completely ignored his shouting. I bypassed the standard guest chairs. Instead, I walked directly to the massive, high-backed leather chair at the very head of the mahogany table. It was the seat of absolute authority. I pulled it out, sat down, adjusted the cuffs of my suit, and deliberately crossed my legs. I placed the thick manila folder I was carrying squarely on the table in front of me. "Please, Charles," I said, my voice low, steady, and echoing with unquestionable authority. "Sit down." He froze. His hand, which had been reaching into his pocket for his phone to call security, stopped dead. He looked at me sitting comfortably in the executive chair. He looked at the empty chairs surrounding the massive table. He looked at the closed door. Then he looked back at me. I could actually see the gears turning in his head. The human brain is a fascinating thing. When confronted with an impossible reality, it tries to reject the information. Charles Vance was a man who had built his entire worldview on the absolute certainty that people like me belonged at the bottom, and people like him belonged at the top. The visual image of me sitting in the seat of power at Nexus Dynamics was completely breaking his mental architecture. "You," he started, his voice suddenly losing all of its booming confidence. He swallowed hard. "You work here? Is that it? You are an assistant? An associate? I told you to sit down, Charles," I repeated, my tone slightly colder this time. He didn't move. He took a hesitant, trembling step closer to the table. His eyes dropped to the lapel of my suit jacket. Pinned securely to the fabric was a small, understated silver badge. It was a custom security clearance pin. It was engraved with the Nexus Dynamics Helix logo, and right below it, in tiny, sharp letters, was the word CEO. The realization hit him slowly. It did not happen all at once. Crept up his neck like a painful, burning rash. His jaw went slack. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly in the harsh morning sunlight. He looked at the silver pin. He looked at the thick manila folder resting under my hands. Then, he looked directly into the eyes of the man he had called street garbage. "No," Charles whispered, shaking his head slowly. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table to steady himself. "No, that is completely impossible. That is a joke. You are Chloe's boyfriend. You are nobody." "Am I?" I asked, leaning forward slightly, resting my elbows on the expensive wood. "You did your background check on me, didn't you, Charles? Before the dinner party. I know you did. You hired private investigators. You wanted to know exactly who was dating your daughter." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, unable to form a coherent sentence. "Your investigators saw exactly what you paid them to see," I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy air. "They saw the state-funded foster homes. They saw the public community college. They saw the years of grinding waitressing jobs and manual labor. And the moment you saw those things on the report, your aristocratic brain turned completely off. You stopped looking." I picked up the manila folder and tapped it gently on the table. "You were so incredibly busy looking down your nose at me that you forgot to look at where I actually went after I scrubbed those diner floors. You completely missed the 12 international technology patents filed under my name. You missed the initial public offering of this exact company. You completely missed the indisputable fact that the gutter trash you publicly humiliated on Friday night owns the very oxygen your company needs to survive today." Charles's knees finally gave out. He collapsed heavily into the chair opposite me. He looked instantly 10 years older. The billionaire patriarch, the terrifying king of Newport, looked small, deflated, and utterly broken. "Julian," he stammered, his voice trembling violently. He wiped the sweat from his eyes. "Mr. Thorne, please, there has been a massive, terrible misunderstanding." "Was it a misunderstanding when you looked me in the eyes and called me a stray dog?" I asked calmly, not raising my voice. "Was it a minor misunderstanding when you announced to a room full of politicians that I pollute your noble lineage?" "I was drunk," he pleaded, leaning across the table. His hands clasped together in a pathetic, begging gesture. "I was under incredible pressure. It was a private family dinner. It had absolutely nothing to do with this business deal. You have to separate the personal from the professional." "It has absolutely everything to do with business," I snapped back, the sharp edge of my anger finally breaking through the calm facade. My entire business model is built on looking for potential where other people see nothing. I invest in people. I invest in hard work. Your business is built on exclusion. It is built on unearned prestige. It is built on the arrogant idea that inherited names matter more than actual innovation and grit. I do not partner with dying dinosaurs, Charles. I bury them. You cannot do this to me, he said, tears actually forming in the corners of his eyes. You cannot pull the funding. Without this merger, Vance Energy shares will hit zero by noon today. We will be completely insolvent by the end of the week. This is a corporate funeral. Think of the company's legacy. Think of the thousands of employees who depend on me. Think of Chloe. I am thinking of the employees, Charles, I said, opening the manila folder and pulling out the stack of financial documents Elijah had given me. That is exactly why I am doing this. I slid the top page across the mahogany table. It was a highly detailed, highly illegal internal ledger. It showed exactly how Charles had been moving millions of dollars out of the employee pension funds to cover his massive corporate debts. Charles looked down at the paper. His eyes widened in absolute, sheer terror. The last tiny shred of hope vanished from his face. He knew he was caught. You have been stealing their salary, I said, my voice laced with pure disgust. You have been raiding the retirement accounts of the working class to protect your billionaire lifestyle. You were risking their kids' college fund just to keep your private jet fueled. You are a criminal. He didn't speak. He just stared at the paper, his hands shaking violently. I am not going to let you destroy their lives, I stated firmly. Here is the new deal, Charles. Nexus Dynamics will acquire Vance Energy today. It will not be a merger of equals. It will be a hostile acquisition. We will buy your ruined company for exactly $1 per share to save it from total bankruptcy and secure the pension fund. $1? He gasped, looking up at me. That wipes out my entire equity. That leaves me with nothing. You already have nothing, I corrected him. But there is one final condition for this bailout. You will sign a letter of immediate resignation. No golden parachute. No massive severance package. No consulting fee. You will walk away from this company right now, completely empty-handed, and you will never, ever step foot in a Vance Energy building again. I built that company, he yelled, a brief, pathetic flash of his old arrogance returning. You cannot take my legacy from me. And last night you destroyed it, I replied coldly. You have exactly 10 minutes to decide. If you refuse to sign the transfer and resignation papers right now, I will hand this ledger over to the SEC and the federal prosecutor. You will spend the rest of your natural life in a federal prison cell. Choose. He looked at me. He looked at the damning evidence on the table. He was cornered. There were no lawyers to save him. There was no trust fund to buy his way out. For the very first time in his life, Charles Vance was forced to pay the actual price for his actions. The silence in conference room B was heavy and suffocating. I sat perfectly still, watching Charles wrestle with the total destruction of his ego. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, counting down the seconds of his reign. Exactly 10 minutes later, the door opened. Sarah stepped into the room, followed closely by two men. The first was David, the lead corporate lawyer for Vance Energy. He looked terrified, clutching his briefcase like a shield. The second man was Elijah Thorne, the chief financial officer who had handed me the final nail for Charles's coffin. Elijah looked exhausted but profoundly relieved. Behind them, standing just outside the doorway in the hall, was Gabriel, the massive, unsmiling head of security for Nexus Dynamics. Charles looked up as his own executives entered the room. He expected them to rally behind him. He expected David to start throwing legal threats at me. Instead, David walked silently over to my side of the table and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of finalized acquisition contracts and a single typed letter of resignation. David, Charles whispered, his voice cracking. What is this? You are my lawyer. Defend me. David looked down at his shoes, unable to meet his boss's eyes. I am sorry, Charles. As corporate counsel, my legal duty is to the survival of the corporate entity, not to you personally. The board of directors held an emergency vote over the phone 15 minutes ago. Given the catastrophic stock plunge and the irregularities in the pension fund accounting, they have unanimously voted to accept Mr. Thorne's acquisition offer. You have been formally ousted from the board. Charles turned to Elijah. You gave him the ledgers. You betrayed me. Elijah finally looked Charles directly in the face, his shoulders squaring. No, Charles. I saved the employees you were preparing to sacrifice. I saved the people who actually do the hard work. It is over. I picked up an expensive silver pen from the table and slid it across the wood until it stopped right in front of Charles's trembling hands. I pushed the resignation letter toward him. Sign it, I commanded. Charles Vance picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so violently he could barely grip the metal. He looked down at the single piece of paper that would officially strip him of his title, his power, and his identity. He let out a ragged, pathetic breath that sounded almost like a sob. Slowly, painfully, he pressed the pen to the paper and scratched his signature at the bottom of the page. It was done. The billionaire king was dead. I pulled the paper back, checked the signature, and handed it to Sarah. File this immediately. Send out the press release to the financial networks. Nexus Dynamics is officially taking control of Vance Energy. I stood up and buttoned my suit jacket. I looked down at the broken man slouched in the chair. Your security badge has been deactivated, Charles. Gabriel will escort you out of the building. Charles slowly stood up. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Elijah or David. He looked completely hollowed out. Oh, and Charles, I said, my voice stopping him just as he reached the door. He paused, his hand on the glass. Gabriel is going to take you down using the freight elevator in the back. I informed him, my voice dripping with absolute, freezing finality. We like to keep the main lobby clear for the people who actually belong here. Gabriel placed a firm, heavy hand on Charles's shoulder and guided him out into the hallway. I watched through the glass as the former billionaire was marched away like a common trespasser, forced to ride down in the service elevator with the cleaning supplies. It was the exact type of poetic justice that money simply cannot buy. By 2 p.m., the massive corporate acquisition was officially announced on every major financial news network in the country. The Vance Energy stock stabilized slightly, no longer in freefall now that the market knew Nexus Dynamics was injecting capital and taking over operations. My office was a whirlwind of activity, lawyers running back and forth, transition teams organizing logistics. I was standing by my window, reviewing a new structural chart, when Sarah buzzed my intercom. Her voice was unusually soft. Julian, Chloe Vance is here. She bypassed the lobby security because she still had the guest access code you gave her last month. I can have security remove her immediately if you want. I paused, staring out at the city. Part of me wanted to send her away. Part of me was entirely done with the Vance family drama. But another part of me knew that I needed closure, and perhaps she did too. No, I said quietly. Let her in. The heavy wooden door to my private office opened. Chloe walked in. She looked completely different from the glamorous, polished heiress I had left standing in the gravel driveway on Friday night. She wasn't wearing custom silk or expensive jewelry. She was wearing simple jeans and an oversized sweater. Her hair was messy, and her eyes were red and swollen from hours of crying. She stood awkwardly near the door, hugging her arms tightly across her chest, looking around my massive executive office as if seeing me for the very first time. She finally understood the true scale of the man she had been dating. Julian, she started, her voice raspy and weak. Have a seat, Chloe, I offered gently, gesturing to the leather sofa. I wasn't going to be cruel to her. The war was over. She walked over and sat down on the absolute edge of the cushion. She looked at her hands. I know everything, she whispered, a single tear slipping down her cheek. I spent the morning talking to my mother's assistant, and then I cornered Wyatt before he fled the house. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with profound shame. I know my mother came to your apartment this morning. I know she tried to bribe you with $100,000 to leave me. And I know about Wyatt. I know he tried to sell his shares and destroy the company behind my father's back. I know about the pension fraud. I walked over and sat in the armchair opposite her, resting my elbows on my knees. It has been a difficult day for you. It has been a horrifying day, she corrected me, her voice trembling. I watched my entire family tear each other apart like wild animals over money. My mother is already packing her bags and calling lawyers to file for divorce before the SEC freezes their personal assets. Wyatt is gone. And my father. My father is sitting in his dark office, staring at the wall. She took a deep, shuddering breath. I came here to apologize, Julian, not just for Friday night, but for everything. I was so incredibly blind. I grew up in this massive bubble of privilege, and I let their arrogance infect me. When my father called you those horrible names, I didn't defend you because I was a coward. I was afraid of losing my comfortable life. I was afraid of losing my inheritance. I chose my safety over your dignity. And for that, I am so deeply, truly sorry. I looked at her closely. For the first time in our entire relationship, she wasn't wearing a mask. She was stripped bare, confronting the ugly reality of her world. I appreciate your apology, Chloe, I said honestly. I really do. It takes courage to admit those things. Is there any way? She hesitated, her voice breaking. Is there any way we can start over? Without the money, without my family, without all the lies. I felt a sharp twinge of sadness in my chest. I reached out and gently placed my hand over hers. It was a gesture of comfort, but also a gesture of finality. No, Chloe, I said softly, but with absolute certainty. We can't. She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely now. She didn't argue. She knew it was the truth. You need to figure out who you are outside of the Vance name, I explained, keeping my voice incredibly gentle. You need to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. And I need someone who will stand beside me, not someone who has to learn how to defend me. The foundation is broken, and we can't build a life on it. She nodded slowly, wiping her face with her sleeve. She stood up. She looked smaller, but somehow slightly stronger than before. Thank you, Julian, she said quietly, for being honest with me. And thank you for saving the employees today. They didn't deserve to lose their livelihoods. Take care of yourself, Chloe. I watched her walk out of my office, closing the door quietly behind her. It was the definitive end of a chapter. The storm had finally passed, leaving a clean, quiet space in its wake. Fast forward exactly 1 month. The transition period was brutal, exhausting, and entirely necessary. I basically lived in the corporate headquarters, sleeping on the leather sofa in my office, surviving on black coffee and sheer willpower. Integrating a massive, bloated, toxic corporate culture like Vance Energy into the sleek, efficient machinery of Nexus Dynamics was like trying to teach a dinosaur how to pilot a spaceship. But we did it. It was a crisp Tuesday morning when I held my first official, all-hands board meeting as the sole chairman and CEO of the newly merged entity. The massive boardroom was packed. The air was thick with nervous energy. The old guard of Vance Energy executives sat rigidly in their chairs, terrified of the chopping block. I stood at the head of the table, exactly where Charles used to sit. Let me be completely clear about the new direction of this company, I started, looking around the room, meeting the eyes of every single person. The era of corporate entitlement is permanently over. We are no longer operating a country club for the privileged. We are operating a technology company. Your last name means absolutely nothing to me. Your pedigree means nothing. The only thing that matters in this building from today forward is your competence, your integrity, and your work ethic. I saw a few of the younger executives nod slightly in agreement. The older ones swallowed hard. Which brings me to my first order of business, I said, picking up a remote control and clicking a button. The massive screen behind me lit up. It displayed a highly detailed, undeniable digital trail of stock trades. "Wyatt Vance," I called out sharply. Sitting halfway down the table, Wyatt practically jumped out of his expensive Italian leather chair. He had somehow managed to hold onto his VP title during the initial transition by hiding behind layers of middle management. He stood up, trying to puff out his chest and project confidence, but his eyes were darting nervously around the room. "Yes, Julian?" Wyatt said, trying to sound casual, attempting to use my first name to imply a false sense of equality. "Mr. Thorne, to you?" I corrected him instantly. "I am reviewing the trading logs from the morning of the acquisition. It appears you attempted to aggressively short this company's stock and dump millions of shares based on insider knowledge of the failed merger, mere hours before the public announcement." Wyatt turned stark white. The entire boardroom fell dead silent. That is a complete misunderstanding of my broker's automated actions. I have a team of corporate lawyers who will clearly explain. You don't need lawyers to explain this, Wyatt. You need lawyers to keep you out of a federal penitentiary. I interrupted, cutting him off completely. You tried to burn this company to the ground to save your own trust fund. You are fired, effective immediately, for cause. You will receive no severance, no bonus, and you have 10 minutes to clear out your desk before security physically escorts you to the curb. Wyatt's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. He looked around the boardroom, desperately searching for an ally, someone to defend the golden child of the Vance family. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. They all looked away. He threw his pen violently onto the table, muttered a string of curses, and stormed out of the room, his inherited pride completely shattered in front of his peers. "Now," I continued, turning back to the table as if nothing had happened, "let's talk about the people who actually kept this company afloat during the crisis." Elijah Thorne sat up straighter. "You navigated an impossible situation," I told him publicly. "You protected the employees when leadership failed them. Effective today, you are receiving a massive promotion. You are the new Chief Operating Officer of the entire energy division. You have my full trust." Elijah nodded firmly, a look of profound gratitude on his face. The message was sent loudly and clearly across the entire corporate structure. Hard work and integrity would be rewarded. Toxicity and entitlement would be brutally eliminated. The rapid, brutal downfall of the Vance family became the defining cautionary tale of the financial elite. It was discussed in hushed, terrified whispers at country clubs and charity galas across the state. The universe has a very funny way of balancing the scales, and karma is not just a concept. It is an incredibly efficient accountant. Within 2 weeks of the hostile takeover, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, launched a massive, highly public federal investigation into Charles Vance's handling of the corporate pension funds, because I had handed them Elijah's encrypted hard drive filled with irrefutable evidence. The federal prosecutors moved with terrifying speed. Charles's personal assets, his bank accounts, and his massive investment portfolios were immediately frozen by court order. The towering billionaire, the man who had confidently stated that strays did not belong at his table, was suddenly unable to pay the maintenance fees on his Newport mansion. Victoria Vance, true to her incredibly shallow, self-serving nature, did not stand by her husband during the crisis. The very day the SEC announced the federal indictments, her high-priced attorneys officially filed for a highly aggressive divorce. She was desperately trying to sever her legal ties to Charles to protect her own remaining assets, claiming she had absolutely no knowledge of his financial crimes. To fund her massive legal bills, she was forced to quietly, humiliatingly auction off her prized collections of modern art and designer bags at a fraction of their value. Wyatt, stripped of his corporate title and cut off from his trust fund, quietly moved out of state, utterly disgraced. The family name, which Charles had worshipped above all else, was now completely radioactive. They were social pariahs. They were no longer invited to the exclusive dinners. They were no longer offered the best tables at restaurants. They were exactly what they had always feared becoming: irrelevant. While the old regime was busy tearing itself apart in divorce courts and federal hearings, I was focused entirely on building the future. My first priority was securing the foundation. On my third week as CEO, I bypassed the executive suites and walked directly onto the floor of our largest energy processing facility in Texas. I didn't wear a designer suit. I wore a hard hat and steel-toed boots. I gathered the shift managers and the union representatives. These were tough, hard-working men and women who had spent the last month terrified that their lives were over. "I know the rumors you have heard," I told the crowd over the loud hum of the machinery. "I know you were told this company was going bankrupt. I know you were worried about your salary, your health care, and your future." I looked at a man in the front row. He looked to be in his late 50s, hands calloused from decades of physical labor. He looked like a man who was worried about paying for his daughter's wedding or his son's college fund. "I am here to give you my absolute, personal guarantee," I stated loudly, making sure my voice carried across the massive concrete floor. "Every single dollar of your pension fund has been fully audited, completely restored, and permanently locked down. Your retirement is safe. Your jobs are safe. We are not shutting down these facilities. We are upgrading them." The collective sigh of relief that washed over the crowd was a physical, tangible thing. You could actually feel the heavy burden of anxiety lifting off their shoulders. Several workers cheered, and the man in the front row aggressively wiped his eyes with the back of his dirty glove. Over the next 6 months, the transformation was incredible. We took the aging, inefficient fossil fuel infrastructure of Vance Energy and aggressively integrated it with the cutting-edge green technology of Nexus Dynamics. We transitioned old refineries into massive clean energy production hubs. We retrained thousands of workers, giving them new skills for a changing economy. We didn't just save the company. We revolutionized the entire industry. The stock price didn't just recover. It doubled. But more importantly, we built a culture of fierce loyalty. The people who worked for me knew that I respected them. They knew I valued the sweat on their brow more than the name on their birth certificate. It has been exactly 2 years since that awful Friday night dinner party in Newport. Tonight, I am standing alone on the massive, sweeping balcony of the Nexus Vance corporate headquarters, 50 stories above the glowing city. The wind is cold, but the coffee in my hand is warm. I look down at the endless grid of headlights and street lamps, thinking deeply about the wild, unpredictable journey that brought me to this exact spot. I think about the concept of being a stray. Charles Vance used that word as a weapon. He used it to make me feel small, isolated, and fundamentally unworthy of respect. But standing here today, looking over an empire built on hard work and resilience, I realize he was completely wrong about what that word actually means. Being a stray doesn't mean you are garbage. It means you survived. It means you were thrown out into the cold, unforgiving world without a safety net, without a trust fund, without a powerful family name to protect you, and you still figured out a way to build a fire. You still figured out how to fight, how to adapt, and how to conquer. The people who obsess over lineage and bloodlines are usually the people who have absolutely nothing else to offer the world. They rely entirely on the achievements of their dead ancestors because they lack the strength to achieve anything on their own. They build massive walls of arrogance to hide their deep, pathetic insecurities. Some people say that revenge is a dish best served cold. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who constantly looked down on you? I would genuinely love to read your experiences in the comments below. And finally, for those of you who are still here, listening to my voice at the very end of this video, I have a special request. You are part of what I call the 1% Club. Please go to the comments right now and type the letter W for winner. This is our secret code. It lets me know exactly who the amazing people are that stayed with me through the entire journey. You guys are the real winners. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, and don't forget to follow the channel so we can share more incredible journeys together. Stay strong, keep fighting, and I will see you in the next one.